If you or your child has ADHD, you've probably heard some version of the following devastating statements. You'll never amount to anything with ADHD. Kids with ADHD just can't succeed academically. ADHD means you're destined to fail. Maybe you heard it from a teacher who didn't understand, or maybe from a well-meaning but misinformed relative, maybe even from that critical voice inside your own head. I'm Amanda Armstrong, and as an educator with over 22 years of experience working with neurodiverse learners, I'm here to tell you something important. ADHD does create real academic challenges, but ADHD does not equal failure. But here's what else I want to be clear about from the start. Having ADHD doesn't excuse you from trying. It doesn't mean the world owes you something, and it doesn't mean you get to blame everyone else for your struggles while refusing to do the work to manage them. Today, we're diving into what the research actually tells us about ADHD and academic achievement. We'll debunk the myths that hold people back, exploring the factors that truly matter for success, and talking honestly about personal responsibility, acceptance, and what it really takes to thrive with ADHD. So let's get started. Let's start with honesty, because denying really doesn't help anyone. ADHD does impact academic performance. Research shows that 33% to 63% of children with ADHD experience difficulties in one or more school subjects, particularly in reading and in math. The struggles often start early and can persist through middle and high school. Children with ADHD are more likely to experience lower grade point averages, increased rates of failing grades, lower standardized test scores, higher rates of grade retention, and unfortunately, increased likelihood of dropping out of high school altogether. One particularly striking study found that children with ADHD were, on average, a year behind their peers on standardized tests by third grade, and 2.5 to 3 years behind by ninth grade. Now, these are sobering statistics, and I'm not going to sugarcoat them. But here's what's crucial to understand. These are averages, not destinies. And here's something else that's important. Knowing the statistics is the first step, but it's not the whole story. Because the question isn't just, does ADHD impact academic performance? The question is, what are we going to do about it? And that's where personal responsibility comes in. Because here's the truth, and I say this with compassion, not judgment. If you have ADHD and you refuse to acknowledge it, refuse to seek help, refuse to develop strategies to manage it, and just blame everyone else for your struggles, eventually the world is going to leave you behind. That's not cruelty, that's reality. But if you accept your diagnosis, understand your brain and commit to managing it like you'd manage any other health condition, like your weight, your hydration, or your sleep, then everything changes. Here is one of the most important findings from recent research. ADHD is not a one-size-fits-all experience. Different symptom presentations have dramatically different impacts on academic outcomes. And this might surprise you. Inattentive symptoms are the primary driver of academic difficulties in ADHD, not the hyperactivity or impulsivity. A comprehensive study of nearly 3,700 university students found that inattention symptoms significantly predicted lower GPAs, while hyperactivity and impulsivity symptoms did not. This pattern held true regardless of gender and across multiple academic domains. So why does inattention have such a profound impact while hyperactivity doesn't? The answer lies in what academic success actually requires. Think about it. Sustained attention during lectures and while reading, working memory to hold and manipulate information, organization of materials and thoughts, task initiation and completion, and resistance to distraction. All of these are executive function skills, and they're directly compromised by inattentive symptoms. In contrast, while hyperactive impulsivity symptoms can certainly be disruptive in classroom settings, they don't directly interfere with the cognitive processes required for learning and demonstrating knowledge. So what does this mean practically? If you're going to focus limited time and resources on supporting academic achievement in ADHD, addressing inattention should be the priority. This might include medication that significantly targets inattentive symptoms, cognitive training focused on working memory and sustained attention, environmental modifications that reduce distractions, and organizational systems that compensate for attention difficulties, and academic accommodations like extended time and preferential seating. But here's where I want to bring in the personal responsibility piece. You can have all the accommodations in the world. You can have extended time, preferential seating, quiet testing rooms, medication and coaching, all of it. But if you're not willing to use those tools, and if you're not willing to show up and do the work, then none of it matters. The accommodations aren't a free pass, they're a bridge. They're designed to level the playing field so that you can demonstrate what you actually know. But you still have to cross that bridge. You still have to do the work. Now, many children with ADHD have co-occurring conditions. In fact, approximately 75% have at least one other diagnosis. Things like oppositional defiance disorder, anxiety, other learning disabilities, or even depression. The conventional wisdom suggests that each additional diagnosis compounds academic difficulties, and some research does support this. But here's where it gets really interesting and surprising. Recent research found that while ADHD symptoms predict poor academic outcomes, conditions like ODD, anxiety, and depression had much weaker effects once ADHD symptoms were accounted for. In other words, ADHD symptoms, particularly inattention, may account for much of the academic risk previously attributed to these comorbid conditions. Now, this doesn't mean comorbidities don't matter. They absolutely do for social functioning, emotional well-being, and family relationships. But their direct impact on academic achievement may be less than we previously thought. The practical implication is that treating ADHD symptoms effectively may be the single most important factor for improving academic outcomes, even when multiple diagnoses are present. And here's the really empowering part. Research shows that the executive function skills most impacted by ADHD, things like working memory, organization, planning, and time management, can all be developed and strengthened at any age. Your brain has neuroplasticity, which means it can form new neural pathways and get stronger with practice. But, and this is important, that neuroplasticity only works if you're willing to do the work. You can't just hope your brain gets better. You have to actively practice these skills. You have to use the strategies, and you have to show up consistently. It's like going to the gym. You can have the best gym membership, the best trainer, and the best equipment. But if you don't actually go and do the work, you're not getting any stronger. Your brain works the exact same way. One of the most anxiety-provoking questions for parents and adults with ADHD is, does struggling in elementary school doom you to lifelong failure? The research provides a complex but ultimately hopeful answer. Let's not sugarcoat it. Untreated or poorly managed ADHD is associated with concerning long-term outcomes. Studies show lower levels of educational attainment, reduced likelihood of attending college, and higher rates of unemployment. One Finnish study found that among males with ADHD symptoms, 23% had only completed the equivalent of 9th grade by the age of 32, compared to just 6.3% of controls, and only 14% had completed higher education, compared to 42% of controls. Those are real numbers and they matter. But here's what those population level statistics don't tell you. There is an enormous variability in outcomes for individuals with ADHD. That same study that found lower average educational attainment also found that 14 to 30% of people with ADHD symptoms did complete higher education. Not as high as the general population, but far from zero. And think about this. Researchers are studying ADHD in university populations. That means people with ADHD are making it to higher education. They are there. in university working towards degrees, even if their path is more challenging than their peers. One study of university students with ADHD found that while inattention predicted modestly lower GPAs, ADHD symptoms explain only about 2 to 4% of the variance in academic achievement. The vast majority of what determines success is something else. So what determines whether someone with ADHD ends up in that 14 to 30% who succeed or in the larger group who struggle? Part of it is luck. Part of it is access to resources. But a huge part of it is choice. It's the choice to accept your diagnosis. It's the choice to seek help. It's the choice to develop strategies and use them consistently. It's the choice to not use ADHD as an excuse, but as information about how your brain works so you can manage it effectively. Now, here's something that might really surprise you. It certainly surprised researchers. In the general population, parental involvement is clearly associated with higher academic achievement. Involved parents who help with homework, communicate with teachers, and provide structure. Those are all good things, right? But research on children with ADHD tells a very different story. One carefully controlled study found that higher levels of parental involvement actually predicted lower academic achievement in children with ADHD. Even more surprisingly, parental involvement didn't buffer against the negative impact of ADHD symptoms. Now, before parents panic, let me explain what this likely means. First, we have to talk about reverse causation. Parents naturally become more involved when their child is struggling. So the association between high involvement and low achievement doesn't mean involvement caused problems. It means struggling children get more help. Second, the quality matters more than quantity. Research distinguishes between supportive involvement, things like demonstrating interest or providing praise, and controlling involvement, which is exerting pressure through commands or punishment. For children with ADHD, controlling involvement is associated with worse outcomes, while supportive involvement is associated with better outcomes. Third, we have to consider the stress factor. Parents of children with ADHD experience higher levels of stress, and when involvement occurs in the context of stress and negativity, it may not provide the same benefits. But here's what I want to add from my own experience as a parent and educator. There's a difference between helping your child and enabling them. When your child is young, you make the healthy choices for them. You set the structure. You provide the support. You help them develop the skills that they need. That's your job as a parent. And I did that for my kids. I still do that for my kids. If they're not going to make the healthy choice, I make it for them. That's parenting. But here's the thing. It does have an expiration date. At some point, your child becomes an adult. And at that point, you have to step back. You have to let them make their own choices. And you have to let them experience the consequences of those choices. Because if you don't, you're not helping them. You are crippling them. And this is where the personal responsibility piece becomes crucial, because you can provide all the support in the world. You can provide accommodations, coaching, tutoring, medication, therapy, organizational systems, all through your house, all of it. But if the person isn't willing to accept their diagnosis and do the work to manage it, then eventually you have to let them fail. And that is hard. That's really, really hard as a parent, but it is also necessary. Because here's the truth. You can't want success for someone more than they want it for themselves. And if you try, you'll just exhaust yourself and enable them to avoid taking responsibility for their own life. So what does quality parental involvement look like? It looks like providing support while also expecting effort. It looks like helping your child develop strategies while also holding them accountable for using them. It looks like being compassionate about the challenges while also being clear that ADHD is not an excuse. And eventually, it looks like stepping back and saying, we did our best, we gave you the tools, the knowledge, the support, and the accommodations. Now, it is up to you. So if ADHD symptoms create risk but don't determine destiny, and if parental involvement doesn't work the way we expected, what does predict success? First is early and appropriate intervention. Early identification and treatment of ADHD symptoms, particularly inattention, is associated with better long-term outcomes. This includes medication, behavioral interventions, academic accommodations, and organizational skills training. But, and this is crucial, early intervention only works if the person is willing to engage in it. You can offer the best treatment in the world, but if someone refuses to take their medication, or refuses to use their accommodation, or refuses to develop strategies, then the interventions won't work. Second is cognitive ability and compensatory strategies. Higher IQ is the strongest prediction of achievement, but beyond that, developing compensatory strategies is crucial. Adults with ADHD who succeed often report choosing careers that match their strengths, creating external structure and systems, and developing self-awareness about their patterns and needs. And notice what all of those have in common. They require the person to understand themselves, accept their limitations, and actively create systems to work around them. That's not passive. That is active work. Third is finding the right educational environment. Some settings are more ADHD friendly than others. Smaller class sizes, hands-on learning, flexibility in demonstrating knowledge, and understanding educators who know how to support neurodiverse learners. But here's the thing. Even in the most ADHD-friendly environment, if you're not willing to show up and do the work, it doesn't matter. The environment is supportive, but it's not a substitute for personal effort. Fourth is interest and motivation. People with ADHD perform dramatically better on tasks they find interesting or personally meaningful. Success may depend heavily on choosing fields of study aligned with personal interest and connecting learning to real-world applications. This is actually really important because one of the things I see is that people with ADHD often struggle in traditional academic settings, but they thrive when they're working on something they care about. So part of the success is finding what you care about and building your life around it. Fifth is addressing comorbidities. While they may not directly predict academic achievement, addressing co-occurring anxiety, depression, or learning disabilities is important for reducing distress, improving motivation, and supporting persistence through challenges. And 6, executive function skill development. This is perhaps the most hopeful finding. The executive function skills most impacted by ADHD can be developed and strengthened at any age. Working memory, organization, planning, time management, cognitive flexibility, inhibitory control, self-monitoring, and emotional regulation. All of these can improve with targeted strategies and consistent practice, no matter what age you start. But notice a pattern here. Almost all of these require active engagement from the person. They require acceptance of the diagnosis, they require willingness to try, and they require consistency and effort. That's the piece that doesn't always get talked about. We talk a lot about accommodations and support, and those are important, but we don't always talk about the fact that the person has to be willing to use them. Right now, I want to talk directly about something that I think is really important, and it's something that doesn't get discussed enough in conversations about ADHD. There's a difference between understanding ADHD and using it as an excuse. Understanding ADHD means that something like, I have this neurological difference that affects how my brain processes information, manages attention, and regulates executive functions. It creates real challenges, and I'm going to learn about it, understand how it affects me specifically, and develop strategies to manage it. Using ADHD as an excuse sounds more like, I have ADHD, so it's not my fault. I can't help it. Everyone else needs to accommodate me. If I fail, it's because of my ADHD, not because I didn't try. And here's the very hard, difficult truth. If you're in that second category, eventually the world is going to leave you behind. People have tolerance. People will provide accommodations. People will try to support you. But there's a limit to that. And when you cross that line, when you're given the tools, the knowledge and support, and the accommodations, and you're still just decide F that and refuse to do the work, People get tired, and they should. Because at a certain point, you're not asking for support anymore. You're asking people to deal with the consequences of your choices, and that's not fair to them. So here's what I believe. You don't have to apologize for having ADHD. You didn't choose it, and it's not your fault. But it is your responsibility to manage it. And that distinction is crucial. When you're a child, your parents are responsible for helping you make healthy choices. Sometimes that means making the choice for you. That's what we do in our home. My kids are still kids, and I'm going to make the healthy choice for them if they're not able to. I'm going to make sure they take their medication. I'm going to make sure they use their organizational systems, and I'm going to make sure that they get the support they need. But eventually, that ends. At some point, we have to say, we did our best, we gave you everything, now it's up to you. And that's when the real test comes. Because once you're an adult, it's your choice. You can choose to accept your diagnosis and manage it, or you can choose to blame everyone else and refuse to do the work. But here's what I want you to understand. Those choices have real consequences. If you choose acceptance and management, you can absolutely succeed. You can go to college. You can build a career. You can have meaningful relationships. You can have a fulfilling life. And you get to define what success actually means for you. It might be harder than it is for some people. You might need different strategies, but it's absolutely possible to attain the success that you want to have in your life. But if you choose blame, if you choose refusal, you are going to struggle. Not because ADHD dooms you to failure, but because you're refusing to do what's necessary to succeed. And eventually, people will stop trying to help you, not because they don't care, but because they've given you everything they can, and you've refused to use it. And that is a lonely place to be. So the question isn't, can people with ADHD succeed? The question is, are you willing to do what it takes to succeed? The most important shift we need to make is moving from a purely deficit-based view of ADHD to one that acknowledges both challenges and strengths, while also acknowledging personal responsibility. Yes, the challenges are real. Inattention makes sustained focus difficult. Working memory limitation makes it harder to hold information. Executive function deficits impact organization and planning. These have real consequences for academic performance, and acknowledging this isn't pessimistic. It's necessary for identifying appropriate supports. But ADHD is not just deficits. ADHD brains often come with genuine strengths, creativity, and divergent thinking, the ability to make unexpected connections, hyperfocus, which is the intense concentration on topics of interest, high energy, when channeled appropriately, a tremendous asset, and then resilience, which is developed through years of navigating challenges, and entrepreneurial thinking, which is you're comfortable with risk and novelty. And finally, cognitive flexibility, which is the ability to adapt quickly and see problems from multiple perspectives. These aren't consolation prizes. They're real cognitive differences that can be leveraged for success in the right context. And perhaps most importantly, we need to expand our definition of success. Traditional academic metrics, things like GPAs, test scores, graduation rates, tell only part of the story. They measure how well someone performs in traditional classroom settings using specific types of assessments. But success in life requires much more. Things like problem solving, creativity, interpersonal skills, emotional intelligence, persistence, resilience, finding meaningful work and building satisfying relationships and contributing to your community, finding purpose and fulfillment. Many people with ADHD excel in these areas, even when traditional academics were challenging. But here's what all of those require: self-awareness, acceptance, and the willingness to develop the skills you need to navigate the world. You can't build meaningful relationships if you're constantly blaming others for your struggles. You can't find meaningful work if you're refusing to develop the organizational skills necessary to hold a job. You cannot contribute to your community if you're so focused on your own challenges that you can't see anyone else's needs. So success with ADHD isn't just about managing symptoms. is about becoming a person who takes responsibility for their life, who understands their strengths and limitations, who asks for help when they need it, but also does the work required of them. That's what separates people with ADHD who thrive from people with ADHD who struggle. So what does all this research and philosophy mean for you practically? Here's what you can do. If you're a parent, provide the support your child needs while they're young. Get the diagnosis, pursue appropriate treatments, provide accommodations, and teach organizational skills, and create structure. Make the healthy choices for them when they can't. Second, focus on quality over quantity. Provide supportive rather than controlling involvement. Manage your own stress so you can show up effectively. And celebrate effort and progress, not just outcomes. Model self-compassion and a growth mindset. Third, gradually transfer responsibility as your child matures. Don't do for them what they can do for themselves. Let them experience natural consequences in safe situations. Tell them that ADHD is information, not an excuse. And fourth, know when to step back. At some point, you have to let them make their own choices. You have to let them succeed or fail on their own. And you have to be okay with the fact that you did your best, and now it's up to them. If you're an adult with ADHD, first accept your diagnosis. Stop fighting it. Stop pretending it's not real. Stop blaming everyone else for your struggles. Accept that your brain works differently, and that creates real challenges that you need to manage. Second, prioritize addressing inattentive symptoms. Work with a healthcare provider to find the right medication if appropriate. Develop environmental modifications that reduce distractions, or create organizational systems that work within your brain. Third, develop executive function skills. Remember, these can be developed at any age. Focus on organizational systems, planning strategies, time management techniques, working memory supports, and self-monitoring practices, and use them consistently. Fourth, find the right fit. Seek educational and work environments that align with your interests and strengths, offer appropriate accommodations, value cognitive flexibility and creative thinking, and recognize different paths to success. And don't forget to address the whole person. Don't focus solely on academic or career achievement at the expense of emotional well-being or social relationships, physical health, the development of interest, and building resilience. And finally, embrace neuroplasticity. Remember that your brain remains adaptable throughout life. Small, consistent improvements compound over time to create significant change. Progress, not perfection, is the goal. But all of this requires one fundamental thing: the willingness to do the work, the willingness to accept your diagnosis and manage it like you'd manage any other health condition, the willingness to use the tools and supports available to you, the willingness to take responsibility for your life. Because here's the truth: you can have all the accommodations in the world, but if you're not willing to show up and do your part, none of it will matter. Here's what I want you to take away from all of this. Yes, ADHD creates real academic challenges. The statistics are sobering, and we shouldn't minimize the genuine struggles. But ADHD does not equal failure. The relationship between ADHD and academic outcomes is really complex, and it's influenced by many factors and far more hopeful than the myths suggest. Individual outcomes vary enormously. Population-level statistics tell us about averages, not about any individual person's potential. Many people with ADHD complete higher education, build successful careers, and live fulfilling lives. The right support makes a difference. Early identification, appropriate treatment, development of executive function skills, and finding environments that work with rather than against ADHD brains can dramatically improve outcomes. But, and this is crucial, support only works if you're willing to use it. Accommodations only help if you show up. Strategies only work if you practice them. Medication only helps if you take it. Success looks different for different people. Traditional academic metrics are not the only or even the most important measures of a meaningful, successful life. And your brain can change and grow. executive function skills can be developed at any age and through targeted strategies and consistent practices. But it requires acceptance, it requires effort, it requires a willingness to say, yes, I have ADHD, yes, it creates challenges, and yes, I'm going to do what it takes to manage it. If you or your child has ADHD, you're not destined to fail. You may face a more challenging path than some of your peers, and you may need different supports and strategies to succeed, but success is absolutely possible. The narrative that ADHD means failure is not just wrong, it's harmful. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that discourages people from seeking help, trying new strategies, or believing in their own potential. But the narrative that ADHD means you can't be held accountable is equally harmful because it encourages people to give up, to blame others, and to refuse to do the work necessary to succeed. The truth is far more nuanced. ADHD creates challenges that can be addressed, managed, and overcome with the right understanding, support, and strategies, and with personal responsibility, acceptance, and consistent effort. And that makes all the difference. For parents, do your best, provide the support, teach the skills, create structure, and then when the time comes, let go. Trust that you've given them what they need, and know that at some point, it's their choice. For adults with ADHD, accept your diagnosis, understand your brain, develop your strategies, use your accommodations, and do the work. Take responsibility for your life, because you deserve success, but you also have to be willing to do what it takes to achieve it. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear from you. What's been your experience with ADHD and academic achievement? What strategies have worked for you or your child? And what's been your journey with acceptance and personal responsibility? You can find me at Insight Education Academy, where I offer courses and resources for parents and students navigating ADHD and other learning differences. I've linked the full blog post with all the research citations in the show notes if you want to dive deeper into any of these studies. Remember, you're not alone in this journey, and there is so much hope. But hope requires action, hope requires acceptance, and hope requires the willingness to do the work. I'll see you in the next episode.